My law students, how are you? I'd like us to go through the unit, that is medical law and ethics. And our topic today will be clinical negligence. Remember, in our last discussion, we didn't look at the clinical negligence as a very complex area that pertains to medical practice. And what we need to understand under this unit is that there are those salient elements that you must be able to prove for any medical practitioner to be held liable for negligence. Remember, we mentioned about those three elements. And we say that the first element of that is that there must be a duty of care. And when you talk about this duty of care, remember the case of Donoghue versus Stevenson, whereby we enunciated about the principle of neighborhood. And in this principle, we say that who is a neighbor? Because once you understand who is a neighbor, then you can be able to attach that to our duty of care. And in this, we say, in that case of Donoghue versus Stevenson, the case really enunciated who is a neighbor. And in that case, a neighbor is that person who is directly or indirectly affected by your acts, and you ought to have them in contemplation. And therefore, it means for this duty of care to exist, then you must have a neighbor. And in this case, remember, when you talk about this medical negligence or this clinical negligence, it's about medical practitioners and the patients. Then you also need to understand under that duty of care, you also have a very seminal case, and this case is the case of Caparo Industries versus Dickman. And when you want to appreciate more about this duty of care, you look at and what was enunciated in this case of Caparo Industries versus Dickman is that first you must satisfy whether was it reasonably foreseeable that damage would be caused to the claimant by the defendant. That is the first test. Then the second test is about the test of proximity, whether it was reasonable, whether there was any reasonable proximate between the two parties. That is the claimant and the defendant. And thirdly, the test that you also have to satisfy is whether it was just, fair, and reasonable to apportion the duty of care on the part of the defendant. So once you satisfy all that, then you can comfortably say that there was indeed a duty of care. But you also remember, as I have mentioned, we have said that this duty of care is all to the patient. But remember, in our discussion, we say that we also have some exceptions that relate to third parties, because remember, the general rule is that this duty of care is all to a patient, but we have exceptions. Remember these exceptions. The first exception is when you are disclosing an infectious disease, like what we have currently, the coronavirus. In this case, you should be able to disclose, and that's why you have even seen our government, our Minister of Health, trying to disclose this infectious disease, because the government, the ministry, owes a duty of care to the public, and that's why you can be able to see. It is not primarily resting on the patients, because you can be able to see if it was primarily resting on the patients, then we could not have been getting the information relating to this infectious disease. And that's why all along we have been kept abreast with what is happening as far as this deadly virus is concerned. Then the other exception, members, I want you to remember is the exception is about these rescuers. And in this case of rescuers, remember we said that like in this case of rescue, remember the case of Umbaniski versus Patel, where the father donated a kidney to the daughter, and the kidney failed, and therefore in that case the doctor the doctor in that case was held liable. So you can be able to see where we have rescuers, someone trying to donate his or her organ to be able to save someone's life, then in that case you can be able to see that there is a duty of care or to that rescuer, because in this case the father is the one who brought in that that claim, or is the one who sustained that action, and therefore it means you can be able to see it moves from the patient to a third party. Then we also have the case of unnatural injury, and this is where the mother, like the case of Barton versus Islington Health Authority, where the child was born deformed, but in this case the duty of care, the doctor also had duty of care to that deformed child, not to the pregnant mother, and that is well enunciated in that case of Barton versus Islington Health Authority. Then we also made a discussion about the psychiatric injury, and a very seminal case is the case of Alcock versus Chief Constable of South Yorkshire. Remember what happened, where families were seeing their loved ones being crushed in the field, and those families brought an action to the government or for that television entity for airing those devastating news. And you can be able to see it moved, that duty of care moved to from the injured now to the public, and you can be able to see those viewers, the viewers are the ones who sustained that action, and therefore in this case you need to note that the duty of care moved from the victim or the primary victim to those secondary victims, or what we call the viewers, or those the audience in that case. And you also need to understand that then we also have the other exception is about assisted conception, whereby for someone to conceive, in that case the couple is assisted to conceive, and therefore in that case it means that if there is any deformity from that conception, then it means that the duty of care moves from the victims to the child who is born from that assisted conception. Then members, let's now, because now we have discussed about the duty of care, let's look at the breach, because remember, when you talk about the elements of negligence, first we say that there must be a duty of care, and we have safely said that this duty of care is owed to the patient, but with those exceptions. Then the second element, which is critical in this case, is the breach of duty. And when you talk about the breach of duty should be tied to the loss and injury, because if you look at the third element of negligence is loss or injury or damage, and therefore in this case we need to tie the breach and the loss or the injury. And this case, this is where the issue of causation comes in, but for test. And in this case, when you talk about the breach, then you must be able to tie the same to the injury or to the loss, and causation or the bad for test. Because in this case, if you look at the case of R versus Blau, we said in that case it is said that leave the victim as you find him. Leave the victim as you find him. In this case, it means that if the chain of causation is not broken at a point, then it means that the doctor who is attending to that patient will not be held liable, because the flow of causation has not been broken by the actions of that medical practitioner. So what we call interference novus or novus interference does not come in, and therefore in this case you need to understand that where we have breach, then there must be that flow. And for us to be able to say that a doctor or a medical practitioner has breached that duty of care, we have two very important cases, and we have the case of Bolam versus Frian Hospital Management Committee. And in this case, where we have this case of Bolam, it is very clear that for any doctor or for a medical practitioner to be held liable, then the test of breach of duty must be ascertained. And in this case, because the courts are not experts in this field of medicine, then an expert opinion is brought in. And like in this case of Bolam, it's very clear that where we unified expert evidence, then the rule of the thumb is that that expert opinion must be responsible. And this case, where we are talking about the body of opinion being responsible and respectable, it is that there must be a logical analysis. So in this case, even as this body of opinion gives their expert evidence, then the rule, like what was established in that case of Bolam, is that that body of opinion must be responsible. And therefore, you also need to understand, under this medical evidence, what you need to understand is that for this body of opinion to be able to induce that expert evidence, then you need to understand that the logical analysis must be done by the courts. So in this case, these medical experts, this expert evidence is a matter of practice, but we say that the rule of law is that the courts will be the final arbiter. They are the ones who will be able to determine whether someone was negligent or not through the acts. And therefore, members, you need to understand that where we have this part of breach, then we say that the doctors must be able to meet the required standards or the accepted standards. And these standards, remember, we say that these are reasonable standards. Like in this case of Bolam, it's about the test of reasonableness. And you need to understand, when we talk about these, the expected standards, we look at someone's code of conduct vis-a-vis another doctor practicing and professing in that particular skill or in that particular art. And therefore, in this case, members, what you need to understand is that the test applicable where we have this breach of duty under the case of Bolam is the test of reasonableness, because from that you can be able the reasonable body of men skilled in that particular art will be able to tell us whether someone's standard of conduct deviated from the proper code of conduct, because the measure is about the proper code of conduct. And therefore, where there is that deviation, then that responsible body of men skilled in that particular art will be able to tell us whether someone was negligent or not. And that is through following the laid procedures in the medical practice. But now, this test, and you can be able to see, like, if you look at the case of Bolivar, because the case of Bolivar tried to amplify the test of reasonableness to be able, and this body of opinion, for it to be accepted, the Bolivar amplified the test of reasonableness to responsible. So in this case of Bolivar case, then the test applicable is whether that body of opinion is reasonable, responsible, and acceptable. And in this case, what you need to understand is that if any doctor or any medical practitioner has followed the laid procedure, even if there is any contrary opinion that is coming from the public court, then in that case you need to understand that that doctor or that medical practitioner will not be held liable, because in that case, if the proper procedure was followed and this responsible body of men skilled in that particular act can be able to attest that you followed the prescribed procedure, then in that case, that doctor or that medical practitioner will not be held liable, despite the public opinion on the conduct of that medical practitioner. Then, members, we also need to look at under this, because we have now discussed about the modification of the Mbolam test, and I have mentioned about this case of Bolitho versus City Acne Health Authority. Then, what we also need to understand under that breach of duty is that even if a doctor or a medical practitioner is a junior, or he doesn't have he doesn't have a long-standing experience, then that is not an excuse. That cannot be held an excuse, because the standards are the same. And if you have a junior or inexperienced doctor or a medical practitioner, the rule is that that junior or that inexperienced medical practitioner should be able to consult or should be able to seek an assistance from the seniors. So in that case, where we have the issue of inexperience or the issue of being junior, that does not hold any water, because you are allowed under that or in medical practice, the junior officer or inexperienced medical practitioner should be able to consult. And you can be able to see the case of Wilshire versus Essex Area Health Authority. Then we also have where we have error of judgment, and in this case where we are talking about error of judgment, then in that case the practice has been so liberal, because where we have the error of judgment, we don't apportion so much blame on these practitioners, but it can be able to go either way, whether someone may be negligent or not negligent. Then, and you can be able to see, like, if you have a very good case or a very seminal case, the case of Whitehouse versus Jordan, and that is, in that case, then you can be able to see where a doctor pulled a child pulled the head of the child too hard and too long, but the child suffered brain damage. But it was held that that doctor, because of the error of judgment, that doctor was not held liable or was not negligent in that matter. Then we also need to understand where we have now the breach of duty. Then we also need to understand about the proof. How do we prove where, or the standard of proof where we are talking about breach of duty? And you need to understand that for the proof, it is on a balance of probabilities, and it is not beyond. So for someone to be able to prove, and remember we say that this, the onus or the burden rests with the claimant. So the claimant is the one who will be able to advance his or her case to be able to say that this doctor or this medical practitioner was negligent. And therefore, in this case, the law requires that claimant to be able to prove his or her case on a balance of probabilities. So that is what you need to note. And you also need to understand where we have, like, where we have this proof of breach. Then remember what Lord Denning Mr. said, where we have the standard of care with respect to any medical practice, or for someone to be able to profess and to practice a particular skill, then where someone says that I profess this particular skill, then in that case, you need to understand that the standard of care is higher compared to that of an ordinary person. So members, you need to understand the moment you say that I'm an expert in this area, then the standard of care is higher compared to that of an ordinary person, or compared to that of an ordinary man. And we have, like this case of ARC versus Cole. As you retire, members, please go to read this case of ARC versus Cole, and you can be able to see Lord Denning, Mr. clearly or instructively saying that where you profess a certain skill, then the standard of care is higher. And you can be able to look at that. Then as the other proof, or for the other proof you can be able to induce in a court of law is that is under this principle we call res ipsa loquitur. And under this res ipsa loquitur, this is where we say things speak for themselves. And we have a very seminal case, the case of Cassidy versus Minister of Health. And in this case, we look at the outcome. Was there damage? Was there injury? Then in that case, if there was damage or if there was injury, then in that case, we'll be able to say that that doctor was negligent. So in this case, we look at the outcome, or we look at the resultant effect. And that case of Cassidy versus Minister of Health clearly stipulate that. And also the same is also amplified in the case of Mahon versus Osborne. Then we also have what we call direct liabilities, and in this case, some duties are non-delegable, or remember what we said, delegatas non potens delegare. You cannot delegate what has been delegated to you. And therefore, in this case, for example, where we have this breach of duty, then a relationship is also important between the hospitals and the employees. And remember the principle of vicarious liability, where the acts of an employee are deemed to be those of the employer. But in this case, the rider is that the doctor or the medical practitioner must have been held negligent. So you need to understand about that, and remember the case of Wiltshire versus Essex Area Health Authority. Then we discuss about causation and remoteness of damage, and in this case, remember we say that you leave the victim as you find him, and we discuss about that case of Hare versus Blau, which is very, very important. And under that causation, two questions that you need to ask. One is that what actually happened, and the second question is what would have happened if the defendant was not negligent. And you have cases there, the case of Boniton Castings Limited versus Wardlaw, and the case of McLean versus NCB, and the case of Fairchild. Then finally, members, we are looking at the remoteness of damage. And in this case, when you remember about the case of Dixon versus the case of Caparo Industries versus Dickman, and in that case, one of the tests enunciated is whether the damage was reasonably foreseeable. So in this case, we are saying that the damage should be foreseeable for the doctor or for medical practitioner to be held negligent. And we have a very important case, the case of Robinson versus Post Office. So in that case, you need to understand whether if the damage is foreseeable, then in that case, the doctor or the medical practitioner will be held liable for negligence. Then finally, doctors also have, or they can be able to have their defense. Once they can be put to their defense, and in this case, they can also be able to have defenses. But in this case, remember, members, under medical practice, we do not apply these general defenses. In this case, where we have clinical negligence, then we only have two defenses. The first defense is what we call contributory negligence. And members, under this contributory negligence, This is where the claimant contributes to that negligence, and the same to the defendant. So both parties in that case are to blame because of that negligence. Then, and you can be able to have the case of Pidgeon versus Doncaster Health Authority. And finally, members, is where the second defense is the defense of illegality, or what we call ex turpi causa, whereby anything done illegally is a defense to any claim. So, and in this case, the law is very clear: you cannot benefit from your criminal activities. So, in the case where the claimant has been involved in criminal activities, so that he can be able to have a benefit of doubt, the law will be able to stop that claimant from asserting that particular act, because by doing so, if the act is illegal, then in that case, it's very clear that you cannot benefit from your criminal activities. So, members, that is basically what I wanted to share with you today. And what I want you to do, if we fail to get another time to interact, read about those other two remaining chapters. Read about the chapter on reproductive health care, and finally the chapter on end of life. And I think with that, we'll be very safe and we'll be ready to do your exams. So members, I'd like to thank you so much for the opportunity, for listening to me, and kindly stay safe. Thank you, and may God bless you.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.